WCG would like to thank the 2024 to 2025 season sponsors, including University Products, Space Saver Interiors, Dorfman Museum Figures, Caring for Textiles, Click Netherfield, Gaylord Archival, Small Corp, Onteco Laser Solutions, and TrueView. Their donations enable WCG to provide networking events, educational programming, honoraria for speakers, and admission for members to attend historic venue tours. I appreciate your attention and will now pass the microphone to WCG Director Linda Owen, who will introduce our guest speakers.
Thanks, Kira. And tonight I'd like to introduce our two speakers. We have with us Catherine P. Foster, Ph.D., who is a partner in Argus Cultural Property Consultants. Dr. Catherine P. Foster is a foreign affairs expert, archaeologist, and former curator with 2 decades of experience in museum collections management, university teaching, archaeological fieldwork, and federal service in support of cultural heritage protection and preservation. As Executive Director of the U.S. Department of State's Cultural Heritage Coordinating Committee, she led 16 federal agencies in efforts to protect international cultural heritage at risk from political instability, armed conflict, and disasters. Catherine has negotiated 10 anti-trafficking agreements with countries around the world, primarily in the Middle East and North Africa, as part of the United States implementation of the 1970 UNESCO Convention. She has developed numerous trainings and outreach efforts with police, ministries of culture, museums, and NGOs, building lasting bridges between law enforcement and cultural heritage stewards. Catherine understands the particular needs of museums and other cultural institutions when it comes to protection and care, having led collections inventory and preventative conservation projects. Our second speaker is Geoffrey Kelly, who's also a partner with Argus. With more than 30 years of federal and state law enforcement experience, Geoff Kelly brings a perspective and skill set ideally suited to Argus CPC. As one of the original members of the FBI's art crime team, Geoff managed numerous high-profile investigations, utilizing sophisticated techniques, veteran interviewing skills, and good old-fashioned detective work. Geoff has recovered more than $100 million in stolen artwork and cultural property, items as diverse as rare books, fine art, Native American artifacts, looted treasures, even Tom Brady's stolen Super Bowl jerseys. An internationally recognized expert in the field of fine art and antiquities theft, Geoff has traveled the world, training domestic and international agencies and institutions on proven methods and best practices to deter art and cultural property theft. Geoff has a proven track record of solving difficult cases, making him one of the most respected investigators in the field. In addition to identifying the perpetrators of the 1990 robbery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, he also solved the nation's largest residential art burglary, ensuring the recovery of the lost artwork and conviction of the thief. So I would just, before I pass it over to Geoff and Catherine, if you have any questions during the presentation, please go ahead and put them into the chat, and we will have a Q&A session after the presentation. And now, without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Catherine and Geoff. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Very happy to be here. Thanks very much with my partner, Catherine. How are you there? I see your little box.
Yep, I am here. Yeah, thanks everyone. Well, while Geoff puts the slides up, I'll just say a couple words. Geoff and I are really excited to be here. Thank you, Kira, for the invitation. Thank you, Linda, for that wonderful introduction. We're excited to be speaking here for the Washington Conservation Guild, and I see a couple familiar names in the participants list, so it's really nice to kind of reconnect with you, even if it's in a virtual space. And Geoff and I are really hoping to bring some useful information to you all today. For those of you who may in the future end up working with law enforcement, some of you also might already be experienced with this. So we're looking forward to your questions and perspectives as well at the end. So next slide. So just quickly, a little outline of what Jeff and I will be going over this evening. I'll be speaking a little bit just about us and our firm, Argus. Only very briefly touch on cultural assets, cultural heritage. I think pretty much everyone here knows what it is we're talking about, so I won't dwell on that too long. And then I'll hand it over to Jeff, who's going to give a little bit of background on the FBI art theft program and generally how the FBI does investigations concerning art and cultural property crime, and a little bit of what we're calling Art Crime 101, for those of you who aren't really familiar with, this aspect of criminal activity. And then the real meat and potatoes of the presentation will be the case studies. And Jeff has some really great examples, 2 examples of when conservators were really critical in helping law enforcement proceed and be successful with these kinds of investigations. And then we're going to wrap up with, again, just some really good practical and best practices for conservators working with law enforcement. So next slide, please, Jeff. Thanks. So just a little bit about our firm, Argus Cultural Property Consultants. If you could click it for me, Jeff. Yeah, our mission is to protect, preserve, and recover vulnerable and at-risk art and cultural assets, and to provide education and training for its protection and preservation. The clientele that we serve is pretty vast. So we help private collectors, museums, corporate entities, governments, as well as the insurance and financial sectors. Our team at Argus is made up of retired special agents from the FBI, as well as Homeland Security investigations and Department of Justice. We also have security specialists for museum security as well as sites. And then myself representing archaeologists and collections managers, though a lot of members on our team have their own experience with collections management, handling, and those kinds of matters. That's our core team, but we also rely a lot on our vast network of specialists. So appraisers, conservators like yourselves, fine art shippers, other law enforcement like local law enforcement agencies, auction houses, and quality vendors as well. So we really believe strongly in a team approach to working on these various issues with our clients to protect and preserve cultural heritage.
Yeah, that's a great point, Catherine. We are all career, for myself, career law enforcement and working art theft matters for a number of years. And as we were kind of approaching the next chapter, we kind of came up with this idea of putting together a private entity that would allow us to continue doing what we enjoyed doing throughout our career. And over a number of years, we really kind of put together this team that we're very excited about, that really spans all facets of cultural property protection. And we cover the recovery aspect, but more importantly, we want to protect it from getting stolen or damaged in the first place.
Yep, exactly. So what do we mean when we're talking about cultural assets or cultural property? I think, like I said, everyone here kind of knows what it is, but our firm especially, we deal with everything from fine art, antiquities, antiques, high-end collectibles, as well as the heritage sites themselves. And now over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the FBI's art theft program. We started in 2004, and it was in direct response to the looting that occurred at the National Museum of Iraq after the coalition forces invaded Baghdad in 2003. And historically, getting back to that, there was a tremendous amount of looting. About 36,000 objects were looted from the National Museum of Iraq in just a short period of time. And the US government kind of said, well, call the FBI and have them send in the art crime team. And we were like, well, we don't have one yet. So that was kind of the impetus for us putting together a team. So Our art theft program, under which the art crime team falls, is comprised of three elements. We have field investigations, the National Stolen Art File, or NSAF, and the art crime team. So field investigations, most investigations that occur from our crime team investigations start at the local level, or it's going to be a local or state police agency or a field office of the FBI is going to take the initial complaint. And if it's going to be an investigation that's going to merit federal prosecution, the FBI will take over. If it's something that has kind of the nuanced specialty of an art crime matter, then it will be passed on to those of us on the art crime team. And regardless of whether or not the FBI is going to get involved in a state or local investigation, will still always provide investigative support, even if there's not going to be a federal prosecution. There's kind of a misconception about how the FBI works as a federal law enforcement agency, like it's some kind of layer, like a pecking order, and that's just simply not the case. Local police, state police, and federal law enforcement all have our own jurisdictions. And depending on where a crime falls, is dependent on whether or not it's going to get prosecuted at the state level or at the federal level. So the second part of the art theft program is the National Stolen Art File, or NSAF. It was started in 1979. It's a computerized index of stolen art and cultural property, and it has to be entered by law enforcement officers, but it's searchable by the public, and you can go to fbi.gov/NSAF to view it. And then the third part is the art crime team. And so FBI agents have been investigating art theft matters long before the program was created in 2004. It's just there was a codified team that was initiated at that point. Cases are still considered major theft matters. They're investigated at the field office level, and we have specially trained assistant U.S. attorneys from Department of Justice to assist us in the prosecution. Whereas there's always the cases that we prosecute are typically prosecuted under money laundering and property crime statutes. There are some specific statutes that are really only used by the FBI's art crime team. The one notable one is theft of major artwork, which came about in 1994 as a direct result of the Garden Museum theft, which occurred in Boston in 1990. And the late Senator Ted Kennedy at that point pushed through and sponsored this legislation to increase the statute of limitations, which is the amount of time before a case basically expires and can no longer be prosecuted. And he pushed that from 5 years to 20 years, which is very helpful when you're talking about art theft. 24 special agents are assigned to the team. That varies, obviously, with promotions, retirements, such as myself. The Boston FBI art crime team guy retired last April, so they're canvassing for my replacement. And it's both full-time and collateral. I was a collateral duty. I had other cases. Some of our larger offices, Chicago, LA, New York, DC, Miami, the volume of art crime is such that those agents work these positions full time. And so we have geographical, regional assignments domestically and internationally. For myself, I covered New England, and then I also had an area internationally for any of liaison and coordination with our international partners. So since the team was started in 2004, we've recovered more than 20,000 items of cultural property, value of more than $800 million, and more than 100 subjects convicted. And I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say this. I hate using dollar values, because it seems so crass when you're talking about cultural property, because it's not all about the money. But from our standpoint as law enforcement professionals, we have to prosecute people. And in order to prosecute somebody, we have to be able to figure out how much that object was worth. It's going to figure into whether or not it meets the elements of the statute. and it's also going to figure into sentencing guidelines. So for that reason, we always come up with the most accurate estimate for the value of the articles that were stolen. So theft in the United States, residential, according to the FBI, it accounts for about 80% of all art thefts that occur in the United States. They're residential burglaries. This is just an example. This guy right here, Miles Connor, he stole this Rembrandt portrait of a lady from a residence outside of Boston. Probably the most prolific and successful art thief in the country today. Miles has a history dating back decades of very successful art thefts. And as you can see from the picture of him here handcuffed, some not so successful. Typically, when we're talking about residential art thefts, we're talking about lower value items are stolen. Rarely involves violence. And it's not organized theft. It's not going to be rings that are specializing in stolen paintings or stolen sculpture, statuary. It's a theft of opportunity. It's whatever they can get their hands on. They just as easily steal your car or steal your television as they would steal a painting off the wall. And unfortunately, the recovery rate's pretty low. Only about 5% of all stolen cultural property in the US is actually recovered. Two big hurdles that we get to investigations and having a successful recovery. Number one is a lack of documentation. We always stress this when we're talking to people with collections, to document as much as you can about those items, receipts, appraisals, conservation reports, anything, because if it gets stolen, it's going to help us get it back. And kind of tying into that is we oftentimes have victims who can't even provide a good description of the piece or even a photograph of it. And that's obviously hurdles to us getting it back successfully. So we had that 80% of the theft in the United States is related to private residences. So the other 20% are museums. And unfortunately, about 80% of all museum thefts that are reported to our National Stolen Art File are committed by a staff member or someone who is in a position of trust. Museum thefts rarely occur from the gallery walls. They're coming from the storage areas for the collections. And I can't tell you how many times in my career doing kind of a postmortems of these museum thefts, and the level of trust that employees have is just not commensurate with the value of the collections that they are looking over. Keys that, you know, we've talked to doing security assessments, and an employee is fired and they don't take back his or her keys, and then they don't record the locks, or there's no inventory control, and there's no security access. These are the things that really make it very easy to steal artwork. And I can tell you that I've noticed in my career that while people who are working in the museum environment typically do it because they love it. They love what they're doing. And sometimes there's this belief that everybody who works there with them is there for the same reason. And that's unfortunately not always the case. There's people that are using this as an opportunity to steal. And then you have these perverse ironies where you have employees that they love it so much that they can't stand to see this object is, you know, sitting whiling away down in a storage area, and they take it home. So just as I said, so, you know, 80% of art thefts are residential and 80% of museum thefts are inside jobs. So basically for every 100 stolen items in the United States, about 4 of them are stolen off of the gallery walls of museums. So it's a really low number. Whenever we talk about museum theft, and having worked the Gardner Museum theft up in Boston for 22 years up until my retirement, this is the pet name that we came up for these theories, the Dr. No theory. And we'll explain it in a second, but it basically comes down to in 1961, Goya's portrait of the Duke of Wellington was stolen from London's National Gallery. And the following year, the producers of the James Bond films just thought it would be a little tongue-in-cheek thing to stick a copy of it in Dr. No's underground lair. And you can see there in this still from the movie, James Bond looks at it and says, "Oh, so that's where that went." Well, people love that theory, and it's more Hollywood than factual. And I can't tell you how many times over my career people have said, "Well, I think some reclusive billionaire has the Garden Museum paintings, in their underground lair." And I can tell you that's not accurate. This is a pie chart to just kind of show you that why people collect art. But about 71%, but is for investment, and about a third is to show off, and secret lair is really very low on that. It's a tiny sliver. So, but the more important question is, why do people steal art, right? And this is from Anthony Amore's director of security at the Garden Museum, who's also a best-selling author. Unlike diamonds or gold, a celebrated old master painting actually has little street value. And that really sums it up right there. High-end artwork, Rembrandts, Degas, Vermeers, they rarely get stolen because there is just no market for it. And with the proliferation of the internet, it's virtually impossible to sell it. And there is not this nefarious underground dark web black market that's that robust that you're going to be able to find a buyer. So the bottom line is masterpieces are rarely stolen. Point on that, if somebody does steal one, they probably don't steal it again, because once they steal it, they realize that they're not going to get much for it, and now they're stuck with it. So we don't see too many people. I mentioned earlier about that master thief, Miles Connor. He was kind of an exception to the rule, but even he wasn't going out and stealing Van Goghs. He was taking second tier and third tier artwork. Beautiful artwork, very valuable, but not as instantly recognizable. So this is whenever we think of the perception of an art thief, it's the Thomas Crown, it's the cultured, well-heeled collector. This is the reality. These are actual photographs, mugshots of actual art thieves. And there's definitely a disparity between the two. So we'll just do a couple of case studies, just because we think they're kind of fun just to go over. And especially these were two that we picked out because we relied so heavily upon conservators to help us with the case. First one is the case of the ruby slippers. Anybody seen The Wizard of Oz, the 1939 movie with Judy Garland? She had her ruby slippers on, and the studio, MGM, made at least 7 pairs of them. And in 1970, the studio wanted to kind of liquidate their wardrobe department. They had costumes in there for the last half a century. And so they hired an auction house, David Weiss Auctions, to come in. David Weiss, in turn, got this guy, Kent Warner. He was a costumer. He brought him in. He hired him to go through all of the inventory to get rid of stuff. Kent Warner found these 4 pairs of ruby slippers, or 3 pairs of ruby slippers, down in the basement. And Weiss told him, destroy 2, and we'll just use 1 for the auction. And he wanted to destroy the others so it would not devalue the ones that they were selling at auction. Well, fortunately, Warner ignored that request. Instead, he held on to them. So there are, as we sit here today, 4 pairs of ruby slippers that are known to exist. And out of those 4 pairs, Miss Roberta Bowman of Memphis, Tennessee had a pair. She won hers in an MGM contest back in 1940. The Academy the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures has what's considered to be the best conditioned shoes. They're called the witch's shoes because they were used in all the close-ups, like when Dorothy's house falls on the Wicked Witch of the East, West, one of them. The Smithsonian, National Museum of American History, has a pair donated in 1979. They're known as America's pair. And the last one, Michael Shaw, a memorabilia collector, he purchased a pair directly from Warner, and size 5.5, hand labeled Judy Garland. And he got those in 1970. So over the next 30 plus years, Shaw lent his pair of ruby slippers to museums around the country. He charged a nominal fee to rent them, and then which he would donate to charity. And uh, they became known as the traveling pair. He regularly lent them to the Judy Garland Museum in Grand Rapids. And in fact, he was just going the following week to take them back after they'd been there at the museum for a couple of months. The museum is, by the way, Judy Garland's childhood home. On August 28th of 2005, somebody broke into the museum with a hammer, smashed the door, and went up to this display case and smashed the display case and took the slippers. And they left behind one red sequin, fell off the shoe. That was all that was recovered. And as so often as we hear in these situations, when we're doing an assessment of responding to a museum theft, they had alarms, they had security cameras, but they were inoperable at the time. They remained missing for a dozen years. And in 2017, the FBI received info that someone was attempting to ransom them back to the museum. They said they was going to go off into the black market, never to be seen again. They gave the museum the opportunity to buy them back. So we did an undercover operation and recovered what we believed were the stolen slippers. Right? And when I say believed, because even though we knew they were the ruby slippers, it's not what you can't just say because it looks like it. We had to be able to prove that they're the ruby slippers. And so enter the Smithsonian. Tremendous resource for the FBI's art crime team, not only in providing training for us over the last 20 years, but also assisting us on ongoing criminal investigations. So we had already engaged with the Smithsonian before we even had a recovery, just when this first came to light that there was somebody who was trying to sell these ruby slippers. So they were assisting us right from the get-go. In the event of a recovery, how are we going to package them? How are we going to ship them? How are we going to store them? Because obviously the most important thing for us as FBI agents is not to damage them further. We want to stop any level of degradation that's occurred since they were stolen and freeze it in time until we can get it to the experts. And coincidentally, the conservation team had just spent a year and a half on their pair, the Smithsonian's pair, America's pair, doing an amazing restoration job on it. So they'd taken hundreds of photos and images, and they'd identified all the materials that were used in the construction of these slippers. So it was really beneficial for us to then go there and get their assistance. It would be crucial for us proving that it's authentic. So in July of 2018, Sean Dudley, the FBI agent he was the case agent, member of the art crime team, he brought them to the Smithsonian. First impression, that's always going to be the important one. They sure looked authentic. They certainly looked like the pair of slippers that's in the museum's collection. Examined under a microscope, it showed similar construction. Both pairs, the museum's pairs and the question pairs, had been manufactured by the Innis Shoe Company in Pasadena. And they were covered in hand-stitched sequins that had a layer of silver on it to make them shiny, which was period. It was a vintage technique because modern sequins use aluminum to give them their shine. And they were painted red on the bottom with orange felt glued to the sole. So all these things were similar. The paint that was used contained cadmium, which was a carcinogen that was used in the 1930s. So now now it seems to be period specific. And the felt is incidentally, which is kind of fun, but they were put on the bottoms of the shoes so it muffled the sound during the dance sequences on the yellow brick road. And in fact that was not well publicized, which was very helpful for us, was the fact that they had red glass beads on the bows, but some of the beads were clear and had been painted red, like a repair job that had been done. This was a technique that was common on movie sets back in the day, and all four shoes had the same type of glass beads, clear glass beads intermingled with the red ones. And finally, and this was incredible, the Smithsonian's pair came from two separate sets. And one was a size 5C and a 5BC, that's women's shoe sizes. And the insoles were different types of leather, and one was labeled #1 and one was labeled #6. Well, the FBI slippers were the reciprocal. They were the actual, putting the four of them together made it one actual pair, excuse me, two pairs. So for the first time since 1970, these shoes had actually been reunited, albeit briefly, because obviously they had to go their separate ways again. And so while the Smithsonian is not going to officially authenticate objects, their examination was conclusive for the FBI to say, yeah, these are the same shoes. So in September of 2018, we announced the recovery. You can see that photo right underneath the FBI badge is the one red sequin that was recovered at the scene of the crime. Terry John Martin, this aging gangster, was indicted on one count of theft of major artwork, which is that specific art crime team statute that I mentioned earlier. Going back to the Thomas Crown affair, you can see that's really what art thieves often look like. He was just this old time hood, and he wanted to do one last score. He thought that the rubies from the slippers were actual rubies. So that kind of gives you an idea about his level of knowledge of jewelry and precious stones. 2 days later, they were returned to Mr. Shaw at the Judy Garland Museum. Martin eventually pled guilty. There was a tremendous time period between when he was indicted to when he actually finally pled. He got time served and $23,000 in restitution for the damage he caused to the museum. And as you can see from his advanced age and his health issues, there was really no point in sending him to prison. And just recently, they sold at Heritage Auctions for $28 million, which is the most valuable piece of movie memorabilia ever sold at auction. So the last case we're going to talk about, and then we'll wrap it up, is Okinawan treasures. So in the kind of as World War II was winding down, U.S. and Japanese forces had a horrific battle for the Battle of Okinawa, one of the Japanese islands. And after the war ended with the occupation of the islands by Allied troops, there were a number of documents and historical artifacts that are representative of Okinawa's cultural patrimony from the Ryukyu kingdom that had been looted. In fact, 2000, President Clinton visited Okinawa for the G8 summit, and it was discussed at the time to see if there'd be a possibility of repatriating some of these looted Okinawan art objects as a sign of friendship. So as part of that effort, later that year, Japanese attaché went to the FBI in DC and filed 11 of the Okinawan royal treasures into the FBI's National Stolen Art File. So fast forward, and that's a term, you know, when you're working art theft matters, that's a term that you often use is like fast forward, because cultural property is either going to be recovered right after it's stolen, or there's going to be a significant time gap, and it's usually generational. And in this case, about 80 years after these articles had been looted from Okinawa, I got a call from a family in Massachusetts who advised me that their father had died, and they were going through his personal possessions in his house, and they came upon this collection of Asian artifacts. And they told me that their father was in fact a World War II veteran, but he never served in the Pacific Theater. So I went out and collected them. They had 22 artifacts, including some extremely fragile scrolls. So I did investigation, and first thing I found, checking into the National Stolen Art File, was, wow, these artifacts, this has been entered in there back in 2000. And we were lucky to have this. I mean, this photograph, and you're looking at a black and white photograph as opposed to a color one, but just to have a photograph sometimes is more than gonna get. So who stole them, right? Because the family was adamant that their father was never in the Pacific Theater. So inside one of the relics was this typewritten letter, and it first off established that the the objects originated from Okinawa because this anonymous letter writer was talking about how he got them. And but there was one of the objects that he brought back, and he called it an ugly and old brown piece of pottery. And he said he picked it up in the ruins of the home of son of the last king of Okinawa. So I do some research and I find that there was a guy who lived outside of Massachusetts named Commander Sternfeld, a World War II intelligence officer. And he had gone to the Fogg Museum at Harvard University to have some Okinawan antiquities appraised back in 1945. Well, the letter that I have, when I'm reading it through it, it's our anonymous letter writer says early in 1946, I took the jug to the Fogg Museum at Harvard. So I'm pretty sure that this was taken by Commander Sternfeld, and somehow it got to the decedent from whom I collected the artifacts. So again, Smithsonian to the rescue. I packaged them up very carefully, and this is again, I had the luxury of time. These scrolls, some are like 6 feet long, and while we have, because of the art crime team, I have acid-free paper and shipping boxes and whatnot. Nothing's going to fit this, so I actually had to hold off until I could get some shipping tubes that were of a sufficient length that we could carefully package up all of these artifacts, and I drove them down to the Smithsonian to be analyzed. And there were a number of objects. This map right here is a hand-drawn map of Okinawa from the 19th century. Really beautiful. And there were 4 royal portraits. And we originally thought there were 6, but actually one portrait had actually been cut up into pieces and framed, and you can see on the right, and actually putting them together like that, they fit like a jigsaw puzzle. And the royal portraits depict kings of Okinawa, the Ryukyu kingdom. And it was very exciting for us because these were the first portraits confirmed to be in existence. These were the only ones. First recovered since 1953. And they'd never seen them before, and other than these photographs that were taken in the 1920s. So we were able to do some more research, and it turns out that they had been looted from I'm going to mispronounce this, the Nakagusuku Udon Museum Mansion, which was the crown prince of the kingdom. So they were not known to have survived, and up until a couple of years ago, they could only be studied from photographs. So they were painstakingly packaged. We had custom containers built specifically for all of these artifacts, packaged up because they were going to take a long trip, crated, and we moved them out, and we put them back handed them over to the U.S. Army, which is the 38 Golf Unit, which is the second coming of Monuments Men. If you've seen that or read about it, the unit that was the unit that worked in World War II to repatriate and collect Nazi looted art and protect treasures. It's come back again as 38 Golf. Tremendous asset for the FBI, and they shipped them back aboard a military cargo plane. They were met by agents from NCIS in Tokyo, and then turned over to my FBI counterparts at the Legat in Tokyo. And then April 30th, which was ironically the day I retired from the FBI, they were returned to the Okinawan government. And they've been damaged, as you can understand. They've been sitting around for the last 80 years, and they estimate it may take as much as 8 years of restitution before they can be publicly exhibited, but it was really very satisfying to get them back. So let's talk about best practices. Catherine, come back, please.
Yes, no, I'm here. I'm here, Jeff. Thanks. Yeah, we wanted to wrap up and then take questions with, yeah, a couple of kind of best practices that we've observed doing these cases. So the first is, to be available and willing to help. It goes without saying, some folks are not, they get a little nervous. Oh, it's the police, it's law enforcement. So just being open and willing to assist in those investigations are really step one. And of course, it's very helpful if you have a bit of top cover from your supervisor or the museum director, that's so that they understand and they support your participation in this.
Yeah.
That way you don't have to sneak around, in your off hours assisting. You want to add to that, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the art crime team, we've been very successful over the last 2 decades, but we would never have gotten off the ground if it wasn't for our partners, the experts, whether it's appraisers, conservators, restorers. Um, these are the people that are the heart of the FBI's art crime program, and we rely on them tremendously. And so without them, we're not going to be able to do the things that we do. And so, yeah, please, if you have the expertise and you're willing to do it, I guarantee that it would be very much appreciated to have your assistance.
Yeah. So Jeff talked a bit about the necessity of having really good documentation. So of course, if you are involved in supporting law enforcement, you're doing an analysis, you're writing up your report, make sure to use really clear, concise language in your documentation. Really try to stay away from using too much jargon, because in the end, this documentation, your report, is going to need to be understandable by a layman or the courts. And so if there's too much jargon or too much technical scientific language in there, it's really not going to be very useful in the long run, especially if this goes to court.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, FBI agents on the art crime team or HSI's art crime team, yeah, we'll understand probably most of the terms, but if you're working with local or state law enforcement, they may not. And as Catherine said, you want to have it easy for a jury to understand, and without having to go over every word and every aspect of a conservation report. Just use the simple words, and that's the best for law enforcement.
Yeah. Of course, good documentation always includes the high quality images. So as you saw the images that Jeff was showing, that there's, a scale and all that stuff. I know I don't think we have to really press that point too much with this audience tonight, but we wanted to include that in the list. The next is actionable advice. So you have law enforcement coming to you. They need your assistance, whether it's doing, an analysis of pigments or some other thing. But the information that they get back, they have to be able to use it in order to take action, whether it's to seize a piece or something like that. So if your advice is in the realm of just theoretical, very academic, it's not going to be helpful to law enforcement. So remember to give advice that is something that they can actually take and use to forward, to move the investigation forward. Sometimes time is really short for these officers, and so they don't always have the really nice paper boxes, that kind of thing. They need the field expedient methods in order to move quickly to kind of secure these objects and to transport them. So any advice that you can give about materials that might be just on hand and ways to package and move those particular objects kind of based on their very specific needs is going to be the most helpful for law enforcement who, like Jeff said, the art crime team is, they have good supplies at the ready, But for local field agents or other law enforcement, they're really not going to have the high-end good conservation supplies. So
Yeah. At least to get it to a stable environment, when we execute search warrants and any law enforcement agency executes a search warrant, we own it until the search warrant is done. We can't say, well, we're going to come back tomorrow and because we're going to go get some boxes. Like we have to stay there until we're done. And so, yeah, I mean, it would be great to be able to get the quality of shipping containers that would be perfect for this article or something, but we just need something. How can we get this safely from here, at least to the FBI office? And then we'll deal with it then to worry about getting a bespoke container for it or whatnot.
yeah. Then the last point we wanted to make was about authentication, which, we don't always turn to conservators for authentication, but it can come up sometimes where your scientific analysis, your evaluation of a piece of art or cultural property could help in the authentication process. But I think most are very mindful of the issues that come up in the authentication space. And we certainly don't want to put conservators in an awkward position like that. So that's why we said maybe sometimes this would come up where you would be called on to authenticate something, but not too often. Do you agree with
Yeah,
that, Jeff?
absolutely. And the best thing about conservation is because it's going to be scientific. We're not asking authentication from, say, a foundation for a particular artist to say based on the style of work or something. But no, if you can say this paint pigment wasn't created until 1940 and the piece is supposed to have been created in 1850, that's good. That's good for us to say it's a fake. Or conversely, it seems to be consistent with, and we're not going to, take it to auction with that, but it's certainly helpful for us to know that we're on the right track.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think with that, our presentation is stopped. We'd love to answer any questions or try to that anybody has.
Mhm.
Well, thank you both so much. That was a really fascinating talk. And I know that we've probably got loads of questions, but we have one right off the bat from Christine. And so she's curious about, do you work with conservators in private practice or only through institutions like the Smithsonian?
We will work with anyone who's willing to work with us, but obviously it's easier when you're talking about um, an agency like the Smithsonian because you're getting into issues of funding. Um, I've I worked on a case up until about 6 months before I retired, and it was a piece that had some damage to it, and we needed to get it appraised, and we needed to have it conserved. And based on the where I was up in Boston, we did have a private appraiser and a private conservator come out. So it's definitely a possibility, but it's definitely a case by case basis.
Yeah. I mean, for our firm now, now that we are no longer feds, but back in the private sector, yeah, I think we definitely work with or would like to work with conservators in private practice, as well as those in museums. Again, we're kind of open.
I guess that kind of leads a little bit into a question I had. I was just wondering if you could talk about, obviously in general terms, but who are some of the clients or types of clients that you're working with now with your company?
Well, right off the bat, I can tell you we're working with a number of museums to do security assessments, and that's one thing that in the 20 plus years that I was on the team, we conducted these frequently, going to museums to see if their security was on par with best practices, and unfortunately, a lot of the times it wasn't. And we would tell each other horror stories about some of the museums that we would look at with the security that was just abysmal. And it's not just security from theft. It's also security from damage or water damage, and what type of fire suppression systems they have. And I mean, as conservators, you would all know that, and it's kind of scary when you see that. And so we always try to do that when we're FBI agents, to do education and do these assessments, because it's in the best interests of protecting our cultural patrimony. So now that's one of the aspects that we're dealing with, is with museums to go out and conduct security assessments. We're dealing with insurance companies that are protecting and insuring very, very valuable collections, and to make sure that their insured assets are being maintained in a manner that would befit their value. You know, that's one of the difficult things when you're talking about artwork, because um, if you're most large valuable collections, whether it's jewelry or gold or whatnot, is going to be locked up in a safe. But art, by its very nature, is meant to be displayed, and as my very scientific pie chart told you, you know, a lot of people wanted to have it out there on the wall. That makes it very easy to be stolen, because it's not just your guests that are coming into your house that are seeing these very valuable items that you're kind of bragging about. It's also the cleaning people and the delivery guy, and maybe, you know, the plumber. All these people are coming into your house and seeing these objects on the wall and taking note of the security or the lack thereof.
Yeah. So in that same vein, we do speak a lot with estate managers, since the buck kind of stops with them. And hearing a lot about, yeah, the concerns that they have, like those party situations like Jeff was mentioning, where it does increase the chance for not only, unauthorized access to the artwork, but just damage from someone flinging wine, that goes awry, or food or something like that. And especially in those situations with the private collector, there's a real need, if there is a damage situation, for like a firm like ours to team up with a conservator, to be able to come in and do a treatment and evaluation. So we're always looking for opportunities like that out there in this space.
Great. We have a couple more questions. And so one of them is any horror stories that you can anonymously share that wouldn't be too identifying.
Uh, Horror stories. Well, we had one with a museum down in the Philadelphia area, and this is no fault of the staff at the museum, but it became kind of an international incident with the Terracotta Warriors. Philadelphia Museum, they were having, as is a lot of these museums do, having like cocktail parties in the museum after hours, and one of the guests had drank a little too much, and he went up to these priceless terracotta warriors that were on loan from China, and he just snapped off one of the thumbs as a souvenir. And uh, our crime team agents down in Philly had to go the next day up to Delaware to get it back from him. But yeah, that's a problem that we see, because a lot of museums want to raise revenue, and it's a great way to do it by having guests coming after hours for wine and cheese and whatnot. But that's often how a lot of petty theft occurs from the galleries, and sometimes like this, when you have vandalism or unintentional damage.
For sure. We have another question that's well, first of all, they say thank you, and this is all fascinating. Out of curiosity, is there any or are there any unexpected trends that you have noted on the types of items that cause the most difficulty in either thievability or recovery?
Well, I can tell you that one of the biggest things that we have for issues in recovery is jewelry. Um, that's one of the difficult things, because obviously they're the easiest to move, to dispose of and monetize by taking them out of their setting, and then you can just sell the stones and melt down the gold. So that's one of the hardest things that we ever see to get back. And again, as with the exception of the Garden Museum case, if you're looking worldwide, typically when you're talking with very famous works of art that are stolen, um, you have a better chance of them coming back being left in a church or outside a police station or something, because they just become a headache. Nobody wants them anymore, to be honest with you. They just wish they'd never done it in the first place.
Great. Well, it looks like we are just about at time. So I want to say thank you both incredibly. This was a fascinating talk, and I know we all really enjoyed it, and it could probably give you questions for a good hour or a couple hours more. So thank you on behalf of WCG